So Chris, I guess before we get started, let's just talk about this version 2.0 of the NIST CSF. And is it significant to the cybersecurity industry, or is this just a very small iteration?
Yeah, I would say unequivocally, yes. This is a significant update for NIST. If you look back at the NIST CSF framework and how it's been guiding the industry and providing a baseline, this is the first change in over a decade that's aimed at broadening the scope of the NIST CSF. And what that means is it's more applicable, or it's aimed at more organizations of all different sizes. And this is actually following a trend that we've seen in the industry with a lot of other regulatory frameworks that are, that have been developing and become sort of a foundational framework for cybersecurity controls. It's also the first time that the framework has expanded its core 5 functions. Everyone has gotten so used to looking at NIST and saying, okay, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, et cetera, and it rolls off the tongue. Well, this is the first time in ages that now we have a new section. We have the govern section. And I say that with glee because my my auditor hat or logic in my head is buzzing, because I'm thinking, my auditor sense or spidey sense or whatever is buzzing here, because that is, as we said, including aimed at other organizations of all sizes and whatnot, but also a broader sense of the market as well, because now you're bringing in the idea of looking at the organization, determining how the organization looks. Do you have control over processes and procedures and all that good stuff that the governance people will look at? So the GRC people are actually should be very impressed with this and happy with this. And it helps. The last thing that's significant is it's really helping increase the realization that security and an organization's control over that security is really key to understanding and measuring the risk for that organization, sort of connecting the dots between security and risk. And that's, all those are extremely significant to the industry.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's been over a decade since the first major change. I didn't actually realize that. And you'd think that connected line between security and governance might have happened before a decade. I guess people had been applying their own. It's not like this is the only thing they thought about when they thought about security, but that is interesting. It took a while for that to occur. So, what's most compelling, or what are the most compelling changes that you're seeing in 2.0?
Really, the guidance to other areas of the enterprise. And I'm not just reiterating my significant change point, but really just re-emphasizing that. So first of all, going beyond critical infrastructure. NIST was traditionally used within that segment. And one of the compelling things is the guidance in the area of going beyond critical infrastructure, including recognizing the management and governance component within an industry, realizing or helping businesses realize that governance that the leadership component, the policies and procedures and such, are going to be a major player in security policy and maintenance. So again, it's bringing, that's why I think this is the most compelling, because it's actually following the industry trend, to include that pre-gap analysis, first stage of what you would look at with a company, when you're auditing a company from a security perspective or assessing a company. That first stage is where you look at the policies and procedures. You pull up their architecture diagrams, you look at the organization at a high level or 60,000 foot level, and you say, okay, do I even have a policy in place? Are there any procedures? How do you handle things when something bad happens within the organization from a security standpoint? So that's all brand new. And I think, again, that is the most compelling delta or change within this framework.
Yeah. So, and those are pretty significant. Those are significant changes you went through there in terms of process and policy and approach. Do you think this is going to change how the framework is actually used, how organizations look at it as a tool?
Um, yeah, so definitely, again, the way that they're going to include different parts of the organization is going to change. So in terms of using the NIST framework, you sort of, let's look at the past framework again and sort of reassess how it was used. It was not a check mark exercise or not a tick box exercise, but it was an exercise that, as we said, people got used to filling in the gaps, sort of filling in the blanks. So now with the governance component in particular, and you can tell, again, I'm ecstatic about this because from an audit standpoint, it's almost like it's being forced into the industry again. So compliance and security people are being forced to talk to one another. But that component is going to change the way that you look at the NIST framework. And when you start to fill in the gaps, to discover what your cybersecurity posture is in using the new framework, you'll have to look at other aspects of it, other aspects of your organization. And I would go back to our last podcast where we talked about the SEC rule and different elements of that included analysis of security leadership, of the leadership program, of the policy of what they do when there's a compelling security event. All of these things now are included within NIST.
So let's step back a little bit, because you were talking about your auditor brain. So if you've got your auditor hat on, or maybe your security assessor hat on, how is this going to change how you're measuring risk, or will it change, or will it help at all?
It's definitely going to help in the process of measuring risk. So, as an auditor, I don't like to make an assumption, but most auditors are thinking about risk. Now, they're thinking about risk in terms of the policy that they have. So you're thinking, okay, how at risk is the cybersecurity policy? You might not look in depth tactically at security controls. If you're an auditor like me, you would, because I was more of a tactical auditor, but normally you're going to think about risk automatically, and you're thinking about it. Again, with the changes within the NIST 2.0 framework, you are essentially thinking on that line already. So, so from an auditor standpoint, it's really, the process of, let's say, pre-gap analysis, or the information collection phase of auditing or assessing a system. This is going to be accelerated to a great degree under this new framework, because you already have a common template in place between both you and the business that you both understand from a governance perspective or a risk perspective. And I would say, that governance function, I would almost call it risk, because that's the piece where you're assessing if this system, if the enterprise is under undue risk. Have we identified everything that could possibly be affect the business in a negative way. So again, that common template is the thing that, again, will start to get security professionals and risk professionals or auditors talking the same language already before they even start the audit, before they even assess the systems and the enterprise. So again, it's going to tighten up policy management as a whole. And that all goes back to that, what you would do if you go through an audit and you start those steps of assessing a system. It's going to be a lot faster, hopefully a lot less painless to sort of meet in the middle when you're assessing under the CSF 2.0.
Yeah. Yeah, it's while you were talking through that, I was almost visualizing a Venn diagram to show the overlap of security and risk, and this kind of acts like that. So let's double click on one industry. We'll say critical infrastructure, which I know is kind of applied to so many industries, right? So it's really a catch-all. But usually folks that work within something that's considered critical infrastructure find that NIST is extremely widely used. It's very it's just a very common sort of framework that organizations within critical infrastructure will subscribe to. So, what do you think the impact will be on CI as it relates to NIST?
So I'm all positive energy here, and I think I'm going to stick with that trend. It's going to have a positive influence, as the updated focus that critical infrastructure as well will be applying on their controls and identifying and triangulating security control weaknesses, and essentially analyzing their systems and what they're going to go through with the additional steps within NIST and the changes as well with some of the other sections. It's going to empower critical infrastructure further. Critical infrastructure in general, in terms of using this, they've already been using it. So that's kind of like your common default go-to that you're used to. So they have an advantage here of enriching their existing cybersecurity policy even more, because they've already been using the framework. They're used to it. It's just a sense now of getting used to those new controls that they haven't possibly seen yet, but it's just introducing more analysis and focus and more optics around how things are related, and identifying those gaps up front, and looking at the business in a different way. But really, they have a tremendous advantage here. So I think it's a positive influence all around.
Yeah, it sounds like for CI, it's more of an evolution, right, than a revolution, and how they're approaching this. So let's wrap this up with, you mentioned controls a few times. So I think of things like asset intelligence, or enterprise monitoring, or maybe vulnerability hunting. How did those come into play in kind of both meeting and maybe aligning with the framework?
Yeah, so they play an important role, and each one of those plays a different role in a way. And it's not just the governance section, but that does have a lot to do with it. So if you think of enterprise control and realization, understanding what's out there, what you have, what is a possible weakness, even asset intelligence to begin with across your enterprise. This will work wonders in terms of filling out the governance section of 2.0. Just purely the telemetry of assets across your enterprise and how they're related to one another, and then what's running, and how things are functioning between each other. Are they effective? Are they static? Are they stale? What the state is of those various assets and facets of your organization is going to be a huge help in not only getting through the first part of NIST, but filling in the rest of the controls, because that'll bleed off into many of the other controls that you'll have to prove as well in order to get the full cybersecurity posture under the 2.0 framework. And then one of the big ones for me, you mentioned vulnerability hunting. And with these changes, particularly some of the more risk analysis based changes that have been inserted into NIST 2.0 here, they're following the trend of vulnerability prioritization. So it's a trend, it's a theme I've seen in all industries now, where it's become mandatory in some sense, within different types of regulations and such. But nonetheless, that vulnerability prioritization theme, or risk ranking your vulnerabilities, that type of thing, the ability to triangulate vulnerabilities with a gap will be critical. To not just a lot of folks are using this just to get a sense of their cybersecurity policy and their posture, but it's going to give you enforceable data associated with that. And one of the things that I hope that or sort of maybe a byproduct of these changes, of this update to NIST, is the trend towards continuous compliance. And from an auditor's perspective, an IT auditor's perspective, yeah, we're always saying you should always be continuous. You should be always monitoring. You should be proactive, and et cetera. But this nirvana of continuous compliance will be assisted by your awareness of all of those solutions, of how those solutions will play a part. They'll help you essentially assess hopefully near down to real time
Mm.
of how compliant you are. And this is where we turn the tides and we say, hey, compliance does equal security in this sense, because if you are following this new version of the framework and you have a handle on this, then if you're compliant with it, well, then you actually have security. And that's the be all and end all for any auditor or security professional, is that all of these solutions will produce that evidence-based data. And this, again, is one of the things that keeps popping up here and there and all over the place within different regulations and mandates that we've seen, where not only can you show what your cybersecurity policy is, but you can prove it. And you have the data and enrichment behind that to prove that, yep, we're secure, we're in good shape, and we are now as much as when we basically produced the report and conducted our audit.
Yeah, I really like how you mentioned, it's all about having evidence-based information that's provable, being able to prioritize these items, because today with automated systems and you've got CMDBs and you've got SOAR and you've got SIM and you've got all these other high-level enterprise solutions, they don't really do you any good unless you know how to prioritize things, because there's always something happening. And unless you have foundational data and a way to prioritize incidents, it's just all a mess. And I remember when compliance first became like a real thing, we said, oh, compliance is going to equal security. Then very quickly, people said, no, compliance doesn't equal security. And that was like a trend for like 15 years. And now we're in a spot where we're saying, well, actually, now we're getting to the spot where if you're following these frameworks and you're actually implementing them in the spirit that they're designed, you're actually achieving that. So, Chris, as always, I appreciate your feedback, and thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and ideas with us today on NIST 2.0.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.